Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. Continuing our discussion, this is part 3 of our unofficial, official Q&A devoted to video game collecting. Spoiler alert, there will be a part 4 and that will be the finale. So there's only going to be 4 parts to this particular Q&A series, which is a lot because if you go back and you look at the first 2 parts, I think part 1's around 40 minutes long, part 2 is 50 minutes long. This one is going to be a little shorter, at least I hope it is. Part 4 will be uploaded a couple of days after part 3, just to give people time to view this particular segment. We're going to get right into this because we got a lot of ground to cover. First question. Sean, I would like to ask, what do you think about bootleg video games? Do they have any value to you? Should they have any value in the secondary market? The answer is, overall, it's going to be the collecting community that decides whether or not some of these reproductions, some of these home brews, or some of these even bootleg video games are going to have value in the secondary marketplace. I will tell you, and I can use an example to cite this, something like Time Walk Games. If you don't know who Time Walk Games was, they were kind of a reproduction video game company that closed their doors in 2012, 2013. They did beautiful renditions of a lot of Nintendo and Super Nintendo games that were either fan-based or games that were released in Japan or Europe that never came to the US. Well, they created beautiful renditions of some of these games. 2 of my favorites were Splatterhouse, which was originally released in Japan for the Nintendo Famicom, and also Sweet Home. Sweet Home is kind of like a survival horror game that was released by Capcom in Japan only. Some people refer to it as Resident Evil Light. It was a very simple 8-bit kind of action RPG-oriented horror game. Well, they translated both of those games for the US market, and they released beautiful, I'm talking beautiful, cartridge versions with full-color boxes and manuals. In my opinion, those games should be looked at as an art form, meaning those games should have collectible value. Unfortunately, though, I don't speak for the collecting community, number 1, and number 2, there's a lot of people that disagree with me on that. And that's okay. That's just my opinion because I like their work. Now, other people claim, well, if it's not an official or an original release, I don't want it. Therefore, it's not collectible. The thing you got to understand about bootlegs is it's a very small niche of an already small collecting market. And it doesn't matter if we're talking video games, we're talking toys. If you look at vintage Star Wars action figures, the value of some bootlegs is phenomenal. Look at the Uzay releases, U-Z-A-Y, that's how it's spelled. I think they were released in the Middle East or somewhere overseas, where some of those action figures that were bootleg Star Wars figures now command a lot of money on the secondary market. Well, if it's something as iconic like that, the market will determine its value, and as a result, the collecting community will follow suit. So I'm not against bootlegs that have collectible value. What I will tell you is, what I am against is, right now, there's a lot of companies out there like Limited Run, Strictly Limited Games, that are simply making games in limited physical quantities. And there's a lot of speculators that are thinking, obviously, because they only released 2,000 copies of this title, it's going to be quote-unquote rare and sought after in the future. That's not how the market works. Something has to have organic collectability to be sought after in the future. So that's one thing that you just have to be cautious about if you're going after some of these more esoteric items that are on the market today, or even bootlegs that came out years ago. Is the collecting community going to be drawn to collecting those games as a result, and will prices increase as a result? So I just wanted to answer that, and you can pretty much apply that answer to almost any collecting category right now. Whether you look at vintage toys, even vintage advertising, there's a lot of reproduction, homebrew pieces in that center or that area of the market that do have some collectability where people will pay a premium for them. But it is limited in compared to the overall scope of the general collecting category that occupies those collectibles. In other words, bootlegs will never be mainstream. That's what I'm trying to state. So I hope that answers your question. Next question, Sean, which generation of video games as a whole do you think has the best long-term investment potential? Again, the market for video games is very fragmented. Let me use this as an example. Those of you out there that collect vinyl records, If you collect vinyl records from the 70s, 80s, even the 60s, you can go to any store, buy a vinyl record player, and you can pretty much play that record, with few exceptions, on that machine. With video games, it's different. You can only play a Nintendo NES game on a Nintendo NES, with some exceptions, meaning some of these other devices that came along. I'm not going to name them, but there are certain other devices where you can take a Nintendo cartridge, you can play it on it, or even like Super Nintendo games can be played on other devices. But overall, you need the original hardware to get those games to run. And that's where I think investors and speculators are not properly analyzing the market. And as I've said before, what is going to cause a kid who was born in the year 2020 to come of age in the year 2050, 30 years later, and want to go back and collect games for a system that came out 30 to 40 years before he was born? On cartridge format, no less. Let's be honest, somebody born in the year 2020, they're not going to be too familiar with cartridges. It's going to be a very esoteric collectible that they're going to go back and want to buy for, meaning original Nintendo games, Super Nintendo games, Sega Genesis games, all these other esoteric systems like Neo Geo, TurboGrafx, 3DO, Atari Jaguar. It's going to have a very small market as time marches on. Now, the one caveat with that is, let's say that people do want to collect the history of Nintendo. You may have people, much like they look at comic books today, where, well, I want the first appearance of The Legend of Zelda, or I want the first appearance of Kid Icarus, or I want the first appearance of Samus out of Metroid. They may go back then and buy those games. Do I see that happening? No, I'm sorry, guys. I do not. Because the market, again, is too fragmented. For instance, a person who grew up with comic books in the 1990s, back when we had the speculative boom, who wants to get a first edition or a first printing of Amazing Fantasy 15, it's the same. You don't need any special hardware to play it. You can relate to that item in its original medium, meaning it was printed as a comic book. A comic book from the 1960s and a comic book from the 1990s are almost similar. A video game from the 1990s and one that's being released today, or one that is digital only, are not similar. The markets are fragmented. And again, that's why I caution people from investing in this long term. I have more videos planned on this that are in the works that will explain this concept better. So I don't think any generation of video games has investment potential, but if you believe that Nintendo franchises are going to be the big thing where people born today, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, are going to want to go back and revisit some of these early releases, and they're going to want these releases in factory sealed condition, graded by WADA, then by all means, there's your answer. Invest in those titles. Do I think that's a wise strategy overall? Not really. I do not. And I'm kind of split on that, believe it or not. And I will focus more on this question in an upcoming video. It's not that I'm completely against that. It's just there's a lot of risks that I don't think speculators and investors are looking at. You would probably be better off putting your money, again, in an S&P 500 index fund, as opposed from buying a video game that came out 30 to 40 years ago today, paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for it, and hoping over the long term it's going to go up in value. Now, there may be, and let me just state this, there may be periods where you can make money as a speculator where you bought one of those games, and over the next 5 years, maybe the generation that still grew up with them, like my age, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older, they'll pay a premium to get them. So I'm not saying you can't make money in that market. What I am saying, though, over the long term, 10, 20, 30 years, I think it's a losing proposition. I really do. Because again, it comes back to the concept that the video game collecting marketplace is too fragmented. It doesn't have the transition that comic books have, that vinyl records have, that certain toys have, because you require original hardware to appreciate the actual game that was released. And that's what separates the video game market from a lot of these other collecting categories right now. Next question. Sean, what are your thoughts on the PAL market compared to the Ntsc market? Will we see similar trends? I was actually just talking about this with somebody I know, a prominent collector who I'm not going to name on camera, out of Japan. And we were talking, and he said, you know, Sean, I can't believe the prices that some of you Americans are paying, because he's not American, he's from Japan, some of you Americans are paying for some of these first print, factory sealed, graded Nintendo games. In Japan, nobody really cares about third-party grading. They don't care about first prints. They don't even care about brand new Famicom games or Super Famicom games or the like. They just go after the games that they want to play from franchises that are popular and games that they want to collect. It's interesting, the cultural differences between the Japanese game collecting culture and what's happening in America, and also what's happening in Europe. Ironically, in America, because the market has been manipulated, you have a lot of big pocket people coming into this market thinking it is going to be the next big thing. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret that shouldn't be a spoiler to any of you. When a lot of money flows into a collecting hobby, what happens? The market goes up. Prices rise, and guess what? It does become the next big thing. That's why I've said this a million times. Video games are going to eventually be an established market in the antiques and collectibles trade. But with the little Timmies, the little Poindexters, and a lot of the unsophisticated speculators and investors out there don't understand, when a market goes from being speculative to established, or even from established to mature, the market changes. If you ever want to see some of the stupid comments I get in my videos, whenever I talk about coin collecting and how big the coin collecting marketplace is, little Timmy S. Poindexter Jr. will come in the comment section. Coins are dead. Nobody's collecting coins, Sean. It's a losing proposition. Now, let me hit you with a ton of bricks. Why do you think that is? Because the speculative nature of coins, as the market became stable, is no longer there. So unlike a Pokemon card right now, unlike a Magic the Gathering card, unlike a factory sealed graded video game that's selling for $40,000, $50,000, and all these speculators and high money people think, well, that game's going to go to 60 grand. In the coin collecting market, it's a mature market. Prices are more stable. You don't have the chronic ups and downs like you do with a lot of these speculative collectibles. So little Timmy S. Poindexter Jr. out there, when he analyzes the market, he likes the fact that he may be able to pay $1,000 for a Pokemon card, and maybe, just maybe, that Pokemon card will go to $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. Well, with coins, you got to know your market. Overall, price discrepancies in coins are a lot smaller. There's a smaller spread than that in a lot of these speculative markets. So the way little immature, stupid Timmy S. Poindexter Jr. analyzes the market, well, obviously, prices aren't going like that, so that market's dying. That is completely false, guys. The coin collecting marketplace in the 1980s with the advent of third-party grading was extremely speculative. It could be compared to what's happening right now today with graded video games, graded Magic the Gathering cards and products, even Pokemon cards. The problem is, over time, the bubble dissipated and that market transitioned into a mature collecting category. As a result, prices stabilized. So the idiots that come on my channel and tell me that coin collecting is dead, they have no education in antiques and collectibles. They don't understand finance, and they don't understand economics, because that statement alone tells me that. So you got to understand, what am I getting at? When these markets change, prices stabilize. And some of you out there are not going to be able to handle that, because now you're going to know, well, wait a minute. This graded video game that once sold for $50,000 and at its low price was all the way down to $10,000, we know the stable market value of this game, and I'm just using this as an example, is $30,000. So therefore, if I pay $30,000 for it, well, gee, it may not be that good of a short-term speculative bet, because it may not go back up to 40 or 50,000. It may stay at 30. Or what if it drops to 20? Do you understand the fundamentals of the market? That's what people are missing when they want to invest in a lot of these speculative markets, as opposed from investing in financial assets or diversifying in established and mature markets in the antiques and collectibles trade. So I get it. Some of you guys out there like these speculative markets because of the price volatility. A lot of hardcore investors do not like these markets because of the price volatility. They want stability. So that should help answer part of your question. Now, you want me to analyze my thoughts on the PAL market. Again, the PAL market, the Japanese market at present time aren't going haywire overall like the American graded market for video games. So those markets, there's more, how do I want to say this? There's more collectors out there that just want to appreciate those games rather than try to invest in them at present time. Do I think that's going to change? Do I think that it's possible where somebody grades a collection of factory sealed Japanese Sega Saturn games and they consign them to Heritage and bidding goes crazy? Yes, that's possible. Do I think some of these PAL games are eventually going to get graded and sold at a high price? Yes, I do. But the market is not there yet. Do I think it's coming? Eventually, yes. But it is still risky. So that should answer your question as to why there is a disconnect between the American video game market, the European video game market, and what's happening in Japan, why they're all looking at us thinking that we're nuts for paying $40,000, $50,000 for a factory sealed first print of a Nintendo game that came out in the 1980s. That should answer your question. Next question, and by the way, that was a very good question. Thank you for asking. What about games that are considered not good, barely worth playing, that had a low print run and sold poorly? These games seem to be mainly interesting for people going for a complete collection of a specific system. Okay, guys, got to have a conversation on this. In my opinion, sometime in the future, the desire to own a complete set of games, and if you know where I'm going with this, there's people out there that want to own every Atari 2600 game made, or every Nintendo game made for the Nintendo NES system, or every Wii game made for the Nintendo Wii. That is going to start to be less common. And I know what you're going to say. No, it's not, Sean. There's always going to be completists out there. You are correct. But it's not going to be as mainstream as it was before. Here's why, and I can cite two specific examples. In the 1980s, when coin grading took hold, up until that point, in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, you had a lot of coin collectors that wanted to get a complete set of Morgan silver dollars, meaning it didn't matter what year it was, it didn't matter the mint mark. They wanted them all. Or they wanted a complete set of peace dollars, or they wanted a complete set of Liberty Walking halves, or St. Gaudine's gold pieces, or Barber quarters, or Barber halves. Well, ironically, when coin grading took hold, a lot of these collectors switched gears and started going after key coins, key rarities, as opposed to building an entire set, where they would go after either the key issues of those particular series, or they would go after scarce dates. An example of a scarce date would be like if you collect Morgan silver dollars and you collect Carson City date mint marks. That's an example of a scarce date. The focus was not on completing a complete set. The same thing happened with comic books. In the 1990s, if you study the vintage comic book marketplace, you're going to see that a lot of collectors at that time were trying to put together complete runs of Amazing Spider-Man, of X-Men, of Tomb of Dracula, whatever you were into. Well, when CGC came along and they started encapsulating a lot of these comic books, what do you think happened? People were looking at these encapsulated comic books and they said, well, gee, you know, Tomb of Dracula 8 or Tomb of Dracula 9 isn't doing it for me anymore. But Tomb of Dracula 10, I can read on that CGC label that it says, first appearance of Blade the Vampire Slayer. That's a key issue. I'm going to want Tomb of Dracula 10. I no longer have an interest in Tomb of Dracula 8 and Tomb of Dracula 9 because all the investment potential in this particular run of issues is geared towards the key issues, which Tomb of Dracula 10 is one of. So the mindset changed where a lot of these set collectors of comic books, of coins, they, instead of focusing solely on sets, they started to focus on key issues, on key mint marks. As a result, the value of key coins, of key comic books went through the stratosphere. If you want to be disappointed about the growth of the comic book marketplace as a whole, just chart the value of non-key issues. Non-key issues have been flat for decades now. Everybody who invests in comic books, if you're investing in the Bronze Age, you want Giant Size X-Men 1, you want X-Men 94, you want Incredible Hulk 181, you want Amazing Spider-Man 129. There's very few people that are going after runs of these books anymore. That's what grading does to a market. It transforms it predominantly going forward. And there's a lot of speculators, there's a lot of investors out there that don't understand that concept. And that's going to be the subject of an upcoming video. It'll probably be 4 months until I get to it, but that video is already in the development stages explaining that concept. So that's just a quick preview of that. So when you tell me that people are going after runs, or how do I want to say this, complete sets of video games, understand that's not going to be the norm in the future. There will be people doing that. Don't get me wrong. There's still going to be people going after those particular items. But most of your investment-driven collectors, they're going to go after key titles. They're going to go after key, high-grade, graded, factory-sealed games going forward. The other part of your question asks, what about games that are considered not good, barely worth playing, that had a row print run and sold poorly? What that tells me is you're looking for the next stadium events. Don't think that just because stadium events is considered iconic, that there's going to be another equivalent game that comes out for the Nintendo Switch or the PlayStation 3 or whatever system that equals what stadium events means to video game collectors. It's not that stadium events had a low print run. It's that stadium events is considered iconic by a lot of video game collectors because it was pulled from the shelves due to a licensing conflict from Bandai, the manufacturer of stadium events, and Nintendo at that time. So only several thousand copies got out. Well, as a result, as Nintendo collecting grew in popularity, a lot of collectors look at stadium events as an iconic game. You cannot compare something like stadium events to a lot of these games being released by Limited Run, by Strictly Limited Games, by Play Asia, just because they have a similar print run. That you're talking about organic collectability versus mass-produced scarcity. And organic collectability, which is what stadium events has, wins hands down. I have done tons of videos on this. So be very careful if you are trying to go after games that are considered not good or barely worth playing, that have a low print run, just because you think they're going to be worth money in the future. I assure you, in today's day and age, with how many Timmys and Poindexters there are in these markets, people are already speculating on those titles. And truth be told, they would do much better if they invested in the stock market than some of these esoteric video games going forward. I'm going to be very honest with you guys. The returns for a lot of this stuff is just not there because too many people are hoarding them. We're going to go further detail into that in part 4 of this particular Q&A series. So I'm not going to touch too much on that in this video. Next questions. Sean, what are your thoughts on the future of the prototype market, specifically the Nintendo, and titles that are of desirable franchises? Given that prototypes can be one of a kind or fewer than 3 to 5 copies known, it seems that if somebody really wanted something rare and unique, they would go after a prototype. Is that the way to go? The answer is no, and here's why. How many of you guys were a fan of the reality-based toy show, Toy Hunter? Toy Hunter with Jordan Hempro. If you remember some of those episodes, he went after rare Jurassic Park prototype figures. I think there was some rare Thundercat prototypes. And I think he even touched on, was it He-Man or Transformer prototypes? Well, this is what you may not be aware. When those episodes started to air, there was a run-up in prices for a lot of prototype action figures that have literally flatlined over the last 10 years before that. There was a lot of demand from that television show showing those prototype action figures and what they were selling for in the secondary market. This is the thing that everybody gets wrong about prototypes. Prototypes are not a mainstream collectible. I don't care whether you're looking, you can look at any collecting category, whether it be traditional antiques, whether it be toys, whether it be video games, even collectible card games, anything of that nature where prototypes possibly exist. They are a niche market within an already small collecting category. So the market for prototypes will never be as large as mainstream video games that actually had actual retail releases. If you don't believe me, look at the Nintendo PlayStation prototype system. There were people, when I did videos on the Nintendo PlayStation prototype system, who were coming in the comments calling me a fool, claiming that item was going to sell for millions of dollars. It got to the point where literally I would shut down my computer and just start laughing hysterically for 10 minutes because a lot of these little Timmies out there, they didn't understand the market. The market for prototype items is already niche. When you're involved in a speculative market that isn't even established yet, it's even smaller. So that's why if somebody were to ask me, Sean, I found this one-of-a-kind video game prototype, I got offered X number of dollars, I would look at that offer carefully before I turned it down, because if not, you're going to have a situation like the Nintendo PlayStation prototype, where you're going to turn down $1 million plus offer, you're going to auction it off, and it's going to go for what? $300,000, $360,000 at best, because the market is too small, guys. So be very careful if you are getting into video game prototype collecting. Does that mean there isn't room for growth for those items? No. That's why I used the Toy Hunter example. A lot of those items, when people started to notice them and the value that they had, they then started to accelerate on the secondary market. So that could happen. But overall, without any attention being paid for those items, you are better off going after scarce and or quote-unquote rare retail releases that everybody has heard of. For instance, a first print copy of The Legend of Zelda, factory sealed, graded by Wada Games, that came out in 1987. Or first print copy of Kid Icarus or Metroid or whatever it is. Because prototypes don't have the same type of collector appeal as mainstream releases do. That's the difference, with few exceptions. There are certain collecting hobbies, I'm not going to get into this, where prototypes are valued at a higher rate than some of the mainstream collectibles in that marketplace, but it's rare overall for that to occur. Next question. Do you think something like stadium events will remain at a high price it goes for? The answer is yes. Stadium events is considered extremely iconic, as I said before. A lot of collectors attribute that item with being either historic or iconic in video game collecting. Once the majority of collectors agree on something, that price becomes established. So as a result, people are going to still want to collect and flock towards that game. In my opinion, should stadium events have the price that it has in the market today? The answer would be no, it should not. But I don't speak for collectors. I just follow the market as a whole, and that's what a lot of high-profile collectors want. That's how they view the market. So as a result, it is, guys. And I hate to say that. But overall, a lot of these collecting categories, and this is what the average person doesn't understand, there's a very few minority of high-profile, very wealthy collectors that define a lot of the terms for a lot of these collecting markets. Whether we look at Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, video games, even pop culture collectibles like toys, comic books, other markets along those lines. And what people don't realize is those collectors that have the money, that bid this stuff up, they pretty much set the terms for everybody else. And I know that some of you out there want to so desperately disagree with me, but the same thing happens with high-end art and high-end antiques. Do I think that a Jackson Pollock painting, where it looks like he just dripped paint in a canvas, should sell for $100 million or $50 million or $150 million? The answer is no. I don't think it's worth that, but my opinion doesn't matter because there's a lot of billionaire collectors of art that look at that and they go, hey, that's a Jackson Pollock. I'll pay $150 million for that painting. If you don't know who Jackson Pollock is, it's beyond the scope of this video. Just Google him. He's a well-known artist. That being said, some of his paintings have a lot of value. Is there talent there, though? That's debatable. I'm not an art critic for that reason. Art critics are very subjective. Obviously, you can have two that disagree. Well, when I look at items like that are selling for a premium, I can't influence the market from where I'm at. I can just tell you that if you're a wealthy billionaire out there looking to collect art, I hate to say it, Jackson Pollock is investment grade art because the market has spoken for that particular artist and the pieces that are on the market at present time. Same thing's true with stadium events. The market has already spoken. If you want to buy a stadium events, there's certain collectors out there that are operating in video game collectibles that are going to look at you in a higher light because you own a stadium events. So that being said, the terms are pretty much made by other more high-profile collectors in a lot of these markets, guys. I'm not creating the terms. That's why I always have to laugh when somebody comes in the comment section of my videos and says, Sean, you're pulling this out of your ass. No, I'm not, guys. These are fundamentals. I'm reporting on how this market is viewed from a lot of top-tier collectors, investors, and experts in the antiques and collectibles trade. It's how we view these markets. It's not something I'm making up. It's not something that somebody else is making up and it just sticks. It is how these markets work. There's certain fundamentals you have to learn if you want to be a successful collector, a successful speculator, a successful investor when you're dealing with antiques and collectibles. That's what I teach on this channel. Next question. Sean, do you think video games, along with comic books and board games, are a flash in the pan where nerd culture is currently the trendy thing to be into? The answer is yes and no, and this is where, now that we're 30 minutes into this video, a lot of you are going to hate me. You're going to turn the video off and discuss. You're going to unsubscribe from this channel, or some of you, a few of you, will probably leave me a nasty comment. Pop culture items, by and large, are not equivalent to historic artifacts. There, I said it. Got it out of the way. It's the truth. If you want the best blue chip collectible or antique that you can invest in is an original copy of the U.S. Constitution. You go and look what a copy of the U.S. Constitution has already sold for when it came up for bid. That is the metric that everything else should be judged. Even high-end art, even though it sells for a lot more money, cannot compare to a copy of the United States Constitution, an original copy I'm talking about, guys. That being said, what a lot of pop culture collectors don't understand is that when you take an item like a comic book, like a toy, like a video game, like a Magic the Gathering card, like a Pokemon card, by its nature, because it's classified under pop culture, the market is limited. Now, that being said, you can still make money. You can make a lot of money in these markets. I'm not downplaying them. But compared to a high-end historical artifact, even if you're on the scale of coins, currency, firearms, edged weapons, antiquities, antique furniture, historical documents, even books, a lot of those markets are truly historic. They define a person, a place, a time frame, an event, and that's what gives them a lot of value. Pop culture items, yes, they are valuable. Yes, they have some credence in the collecting manosphere. But overall, they will never, ever equate to a high-end historical artifact. Why do you think I do videos talking about collectors who want to open up museums, and I caution them from going in that direction? It's pop culture. It's limited in scope. No one's going to drive 500 miles to look at your Pez collection. I don't care how complete it is. I don't care what rare pieces you have in that collection. You will not be able to keep upkeep on a cost of housing that collection in a retail building where people are going to come, pay an admittance fee, and walk in and view that collection. It's no different what all these video game collectors are trying to do. Well, Sean, I'm going to collect a game of every system and I'm going to put it in a museum. That's great. I hope it works out for you. I can tell you there is a 90 to 95% failure rate when a collector opens up a museum. You know what people can really succeed at opening up a museum? Very wealthy individuals who collect art, and they leave like a blind trust where all that art is pretty much protected, where they can't sell the art, and they also leave enough money to feature those particular artifacts in a museum. Or number two, the government. The Smithsonian is one of the most successfully run museums in the United States because it's run by the federal government. That's why, guys. And guess what? Pretty much everything in the Smithsonian is geared towards historical artifacts. There's very few, if any, pop culture-based collectibles in the Smithsonian. Now, you can argue, Sean, that's not true. They've put together collections of comic books. They're putting together collections of video games. The public at present time is not able to view those collections. They're not paying a premium to do that. They're paying a premium to go look at weapons that were used in the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. They're looking at rare coins. They're looking at rare antiquities from the founding of life as we know it, or at least the United States. That's how museums work best, not with pop culture icons. Now that that's out of the way, if any of you out there have a problem with me stating that, please feel free to unsubscribe. I understand that's a very unpopular comment. I know I'm supposed to be a hype-driven YouTube channel with 100,000 subscribers where I tell you that your Amazing Spider-Man 129 in 8.0 condition is going to be an excellent investment and it's going to pay for either your or your kids' college education in 10 to 20 years. I'm sorry, that's not what we do in this channel. If this is the first video of mine you're watching and that's the advice that you want, this segment, my channel, is probably not for you. I tell the truth on this channel. I don't sugarcoat it. Next question. Sean, knowing that the Intellivision Amico's release date has been pushed back, will the Amico be deemed successful or will it be deemed a commercial failure by the critics 6 months after it releases? Guys, let's use common sense here. Do you really think the Intellivision Amico is going to compete with the Nintendo Switch? Do we really think that this device is going to compete with the PlayStation 4 or the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox One or the Xbox One X? The answer is no. As a result, this is a very niche market. It takes a lot of money to launch a video game platform in this day and age. Look at the Google Stadia. Google has a ton of money. I'm surprised Apple hasn't tried to get into the video game marketplace at present time. We're not going to talk about the Apple and Bandai. Was it the Pippin? I think it was the Pippin that came out in the 1990s and kind of flopped. But in today's day and age, you would think that a company like Apple, if they saw a viable way in, much like Microsoft did, they would want to go after the video game marketplace. Well, ironically, companies realize that it takes an awful lot of money to release a video game system in present day. Look at how much Sega wanted so bad to get into the video game hardware marketplace. They started in that realm, then they pulled out. Why do you think they pulled out? They can't afford to compete with Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo at present time. Do you really think an Intellivision Amico is going to compete with the likes of Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft? No, and they know that. This, if it even succeeds, it's going to be a very niche market. Most likely, well, you know what? I'll do a video on that. I'm not going to give you my opinion on what I think is going to happen to the Amico. That's not fair. It's not fair to the creators right now because the system has yet to come out. But I'm going to state, just from a logical standpoint, this is how I'm going to end this question. Do you really think that can compete with the Nintendo Switch, with the Sony PlayStation 4, Sony PlayStation 5, or even the Microsoft Xbox series of consoles? The answer should be no. With that question, I'm going to end this part 3 of this particular series. Part 4 will air in the next couple of days. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments, any feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section below. If the content that I produce resonates with you, please consider liking and or subscribing to this channel. If it does not resonate with you, I fully understand. Stay blue-pilled, my brothers. Stay blue-pilled in that case. You can't handle being red-pilled in the collectibles marketplace. Being red-pilled in the collectibles marketplace, which is what I'm doing on this channel, is what's going to make you a better collector, a better speculator, and a better investor. Thank you and good night.